everybody, Marcus here. Now I want to remind everybody of our pact that for every 1,000 subscribers I receive on this channel, I will give away one copy of Cyberlink's Power Director 13 Ultra software. So please consider liking this video, sharing it, subscribing, or even just listening to the very end. I received a comment on my Genesis of the MGTOW video from a subscriber named Krieg9, and I felt that the sentiment Krieg expresses is something that many men are undoubtedly experiencing. Now, before I read this comment, I want to point out to all my listeners that this is the sort of existential suffering that will compel me to do a video specifically replying to the commenter if I've not already done a video on that subject. So please, share your existential crises in the comments section because I do care, and I will respond appropriately. So, Krieg writes, I have such a hard time struggling with nihilism at times. When I absolutely have to be dutiful, I can feel my own lack of discipline and thoroughness, and it hurts so deeply to notice that about myself. How to overcome? I've relied on nagging and emotional shakeups from females in order to fulfill my duties, but I keep struggling to find that inner strength. I'd love to see more videos on the metaphysics of MGTOW, by the way. Keep up the amazing work. Krieg, I'm going to address you directly in this video. The apathy you describe yourself experiencing, this absence of motivation, is not uncommon. However, you explicitly state it comes from a nihilistic outlook. Though this surely may be the case, I hesitate to accept this, as you also mentioned duty, and duty is not logically consistent with nihilism. But I definitely don't want to dismiss your self-evaluation, so I will proceed, assuming you are correct. Krieg, what I want to do with you, and all other listeners who believe they have fallen into nihilism, is to take you on a journey during this video. I want you to experience the journey into Nietzsche's account of nihilism with me, and when we arrive there, I want to give you insights on what can be done. The first step on this journey is to understand what we are truly saying when we are talking about nihilism. And perhaps the most eloquent, succinct, and eerily beautiful way of describing nihilism comes from an aphorism in Nietzsche's unpublished notes that were posthumously compiled by his sister and released under the name The Will to Power. Nietzsche says that nihilism is the devaluation of all values. Though what this means sounds straightforward on the surface, when we start to dig into the word all, we find a horrific monster. You see, Krieg, we're not talking about superficial things like a loss of meaning in career or family, or even children. No, we're talking about all values. Those idols we have so deeply entrenched in our soul that we're hardly even aware of them as values at all. Values such as good, values such as truth, the value we place on meaning, the value we place on valuing itself. These values, too, devalue themselves. For you see, the nihilistic disposition does not permit you to ground yourself in anything. One very important and significant observation about nihilism is that it is in no way a psychological condition. It is not an emotional or personal failing. Someone who is struggling with nihilism is not emotionally sick, nor is he damaged, defective, or unhealthy in any way. Nihilism is an existential crisis. It has an emotional manifestation, but that manifestation stems from what is in fact a metaphysical conclusion. This is why silly platitudes are not going to help someone who is struggling with nihilism. He cannot be reassured, and no amount of talking about his feelings will help him overcome nihilism. No, the solution to nihilism will have to come from metaphysics. In fact, there is no way to even understand nihilism without diving into metaphysics. What, however, is not necessary is for someone to have to be a philosopher in order to overcome nihilism. In fact, you don't even need to understand what the word metaphysics means. Another point that needs to be stressed is that nihilism is not like some chronic pain that you are always experiencing. It can come in waves, Krieg, and at the peak of each wave, your world becomes very bleak and dark. In the valley of these waves, you will be upbeat and cheerful. You'll have glimmers of hope where it becomes pernicious is when the outlook you have during a peak starts to inform your behaviors. When you start to live nihilistically, that is when you are truly suffering. The dark thoughts themselves, though a danger, are not themselves the worst of it. But perhaps we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's take a step back for a moment, Krieg. I want you to engage in a little exercise with me. I want you to experience Nietzsche's account of nihilism. I want you to find yourself in this perspective and see where that rabbit hole goes. What will follow is an intense dive into the inner workings of nihilism as Nietzsche saw it. Close your eyes. Now focus on what I am about to say and allow yourself to feel the full impact of it. Krieg, you are going to die, and there's nothing you can do about it. Every decision you take in your life will inevitably lead to your death. You cannot negotiate this away. You cannot buy your way out of it. No amount of power or influence will save you from death, and you will die alone. No one will be able to comfort you in your moment of death. No one knows how, for that moment does not allow you to communicate back to those around you, nor is it long enough for you to understand what is happening. You have never experienced it before, nor will you ever again. It happens only once. And when your moment comes, nothing that came before will be in your focus. Your mind will not be on your accomplishments or failures. It will not be on your children. You will neither regret, nor will you be proud of your life. You will only exist in that moment and nowhere but that moment. That moment will be the entirety of your reality. And after that moment finishes, well, no one knows. Krieg, do me a favor. Try and see past that moment. Try and see through that veil, past that inky blackness. Try and see past this monster. Try and fight your way through it. But beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long enough into the abyss gazes also into you. Now ask yourself, what can have any value if every decision leads into this abyss? What worth can being good have if it can't save you? What worth can truth have if it is impotent when faced with oblivion? Reason, too, cannot save you. So what good is reason? What then is left for us to value? What can pull you out of this maw? Nothing. All values devalue themselves. Hope becomes impossible. This is descent into nihilism as Nietzsche sees it, Krieg, but it is not nihilism itself. The picture is not yet complete. You see, man has fought this monster, this abyss, a long time ago and won. This victory took the form of the otherworldly. Kierkegaard calls this phenomenon the leap of faith. But how does this leap come about? Well, when a man gazes long enough into the abyss, he comes to think of it as a thing that needs explaining. And it is not good enough to just accept it, as already in this sentiment, we presuppose it is a something, not a no thing, not nothing. No, it is something. Therefore, it participates in being, and it needs to be accounted for. So, if reason cannot see through the abyss, it must jump over it and gaze upon it from the other side. Heaven, hell, God, these are all things in the otherworldly. These are things behind the abyss, accounting for it. But this religious otherworldly is only one type, and only the most superficial type. No, there are other very subtle forms of the otherworldly. Meaning, too, we have placed in the other world, says Nietzsche. For meaning, we, without warrant, without a shred of accounting, assert must be bestowed upon us from something outside of us. Objectivity itself is the otherworldly, as objectivity is no more than God's perspective. And in this way, only those things that gain approval from the otherworldly gain meaning. Meaning as we wish to understand it from the question, what is the meaning of life? Well, in this way, too, does truth become otherworldly. It is not here. It's somewhere out there, looking to be found. And with this realization, so too does metaphysics become the intellectual otherworldly. You see, Krieg, these values we so cherish, whether God, metaphysics, meaning, purpose, these are all our idols, and us idolaters. These idols, and many others, are what Nietzsche attacks in his work, Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist. And so with our idols securely in place, we can now come to account for the abyss. God did it, if you are religious, the unmoved mover, or the good if you are Platonist or Aristotelian. But what happens if so too you kill God? If you kill metaphysics, you are left once again with nothing to value. You are back to gazing into the abyss, and it gazes back into you, hopelessly engulfs you. And if you succumb to despair, you kill yourself. If you do not succumb to despair, the hopelessness remains, and you become apathetic. You become what Nietzsche calls the last man, a being whose only interest is to keep warm, fed, and generally just to be left alone. For this man, this last man, wills nothing. He wills nihilism rather than have nothing to will at all, and therefore die. The last man is compelled by the will to nothingness. He wills unlife, but not death. He retreats back to a state from before. He retreats back to the bestial man who existed before becoming aware of his own mortality. He lives like a dog, ignorant of his own death, only capable of fulfilling basic instincts. For any higher function demands he face and resolve himself against the abyss. He may be considered alive, but his life is not worth living. You see, Krieg, this is how Nietzsche saw nihilism. It is the devaluation of all values, including the value to value anything. But when you do that, you're no longer truly human. Now, let us see how Nietzsche paves a road out of nihilism, as it's clearly a dreadful state of being. As we said earlier, the men who stared into the abyss long ago had created a method of valuation, a solution that demanded the otherworldly. The otherworldly is a bestowment of value onto things in the here and now from somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere with the authority to bestow value, somewhere other, as the here and now was clearly not deemed good enough as an arbitrator and value setter. But then, a fall from grace happened. We lost hope in the otherworldly valuations, and so slowly succumbed to decadence, voluptuousness, all leading into nihilism. But let us perhaps explore how this fall from grace occurred. You see, a deal was struck with the otherworldly. In every form that this otherworldly takes, a promise is made to man. If you believe in me, God, you will have eternal salvation, and your meaning becomes this salvation. If you believe in me, truth, you will have knowledge, and so your meaning will be the possession of knowledge, and through it, your answers of what lies beyond the veil. But the standard to get into heaven, the standard to attain truth was set so high that it exceeded human capability. For how could it not? After all, the here and now was not good enough to set values. So how would it be good enough to meet them? So when it came to be realized that this standard was unreachable, it appeared like the deal was rigged all along. And man, having felt cheated by this deal, grew angry. And anger can only be satiated with retribution. This retribution took the form of the devaluation of that betraying value. For if the value cannot be reached, then the project as a whole needs to be abandoned. You see, this process is so clear within the MGTOW phenomenon. Men set women up as an idol. A promise was made and a deal struck. If I am a good man, you will love me and stay with me. And in this, I will find my meaning. But this deal was also the otherworldly, for the deal was with an image of woman, not with women. When a man comes to realize this goal is unreachable, he devalues relationships and opts out. For you see, the man wants the idol, not some second-best consolation prize. What do we do then? Well, we must gain confidence in our ability to set valuations. Nietzsche said famously in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal." And what this means is that man is something to be overcome. We, the men of today, the men who have been betrayed by the otherworldly, by women, by society, in one word, by our deepest and most sacred idols, we are not the goal. We are the bridge. Nihilism, in this way too, is not an end, is not a goal, not a final destination. It is a rickety bridge hanging over the abyss that needs to be overcome so that the men that follow us can stand on new values, better values. And though this burden has fallen unto us, so too we have benefited from the overcoming of those who have preceded us. Many will fall off this rickety bridge along the way, but those that make it to the other side will be the new generation of value setters. Nietzsche looked upon nihilism as the natural conclusion of Christian morality, the morality of the otherworldly. He looked to the future past this bridge and made two predictions. One of the last man, as we have mentioned before, the man who falls off the rickety bridge into the abyss of nihilism and is consumed by it. The other man he predicted was what he called the Übermensch, or the Overman, or Superman, the man who crosses over the bridge. Where he differs from us is in that he is a value setter. He is a sort of man who has no need for external validation, be it from God, women, or whatever. He is a philosopher of tomorrow, according to Nietzsche. He creates new, original values, ones not seen before, or at least not seen as values before. If any persons in history could be seen in any way similar to the Overman, it would be Jesus and Socrates. You see, Nietzsche did not agree with the values that these men set, but he greatly admired their sheer strength of will and connection with the human condition to be able to set them. How the Overman, whether one individual or a type of individual, will differ from figures such as Socrates or Jesus, is that the values that the Overman will set will have nothing to do with the otherworldly. They will be original and not opposite of today's values. So it's not the case that killing will be okay or anything like that. No. It's that whatever will be valued will have man as the standard. These values will be reachable, unlike the otherworldly. They will be something human, all too human. At this point, in anticipation of a rebuttal I expect to be put forward, I will address it immediately. This whole build-up that Nietzsche puts forward so far is not to assert that truth and objectivity don't exist and that everything is relative. No, that's a very superficial reading into this message. There are standards, as objective as the human condition allows. The key qualifier being human and not otherworldly. You see, when you get sick, you don't go to the shoemaker for advice, as his advice would probably kill you. You go to the doctor. An order of rank exists and will always exist. Some people actually have no idea what the hell they're talking about. But the valuation is human, set through the human value of health, which was set by the pragmatic and very human will to live. And in this way, health is an objective value, but not otherworldly. It's only when you demand a higher thing to give value to health do you fall back into the old way. Health needs no permission from above to be valued. If you demand a higher justification, you will always be betrayed, and nihilism will consume you. At least, that's what Nietzsche says. So, this is Nietzsche's positive philosophical project in overcoming nihilism. But Krieg, other philosophers have a different approach. Camus says that we need to stare into the abyss, stare right in the eye, and spit in its face through defiance. He calls the human condition our existential experience. He calls it the absurd. In his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus wants us to embrace the absurd, and in spite of it, to spite it, to achieve and conquer anyways. It's our very nature, our will to power that compels us to overcome our obstacles. This value, this defiance too, is human, all too human. You see, Krieg, the absurd life has a lot of advantages. It allows you to forge a consequence-free life. The inevitability of death frees you from expectations. You can no longer disappoint anyone living the absurd life because, well, what's the worst that can happen? Nothing. That's what. There's an uplifting levity granted to you by your own mortality. It gives you the freedom you need to be creative. You don't have to treat your life as a checklist that needs to be met in order for you to get in good for after you're dead. No, your life becomes a work of art. It becomes a hitafude ryu, the Japanese art form that allows you to compose a picture with only one brushstroke. You see, it is the constraint of freedom that creates greatness. Look at the haiku, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Look at Shakespeare and his iambic pentameter. The constraints imposed by the artist upon himself is what allows for greatness to come forth. Death is just one of those constraints on the art of living. Become your own ideal, your own valuation on meaning. Do not merely value your life. Be a value in itself. Be that which someone else aspires to achieve. After all, that is what people do with values. They aspire towards them. And Krieg, you are human. So you are a value achievable. Become who you are. And this was Camus' positive philosophical project in overcoming nihilism. So Krieg, here we have dived deeply into the metaphysical picture that Nietzsche puts together. But the irony of calling it a metaphysical picture is that Nietzsche's account in fact denounces metaphysics. He lays the root of nihilism into man's inability to cope with the fact that all these otherworldly things in fact don't exist. That metaphysics itself was a lie to begin with. It's like a child falling into depression and losing hope after finding out Santa Claus is not real. So too, Nietzsche says we have lost hope in the world after finding out that God, truth, meaning, and all the idols we have set for ourselves were all fairy tales. And since we have nothing else to believe in, we succumb to nihilism. Camus reinforces the same sentiment, but his solution is not to create new values, but to embrace the absence of meaning, to live the absurd life with zest and vigor, to rebel against the absurd and therefore live an absurd life. Krieg, at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, Marcus, is your channel not called Groundworks for the Metaphysics of MGTOW? Have you not, in fact, just told me that metaphysics is just a fairy tale? Have you not just completely undermined the entire point and purpose of your channel? And to this, I say to you, Krieg, yes, you're absolutely correct. The story Nietzsche tells and the story Camus reinforces completely undermines metaphysics and my entire project. But you see, Krieg, there's another account of nihilism, one that you were not quite ready for to hear until you came to understand the one from Nietzsche. This other account has a very different answer to what nihilism is and how it must be overcome, and in turn also explains and paints a very sinister picture of Nietzsche's version. For that account, however, you will need to wait for part 2 of this video. You know, it'll blow your mind if I am successful in correctly communicating it. Also, in the second part, I'll be circling back to MGTOW and the consequences that this account has about our community. Thanks for listening. Go team.